Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Admissions Connect. I am delighted to welcome Mary Hicks this afternoon, who's going to talk to you about why and how you should audit your comms. Mary has a wealth of experience in the independent school sector, having lived in it, worked at it, and been a governor to a number of schools over 40 years. She was one of the pioneers of schools marketing, being one of the first ever appointed directors of marketing. Mary also served on the AMCIS board of directors and now retired from full-time work, enjoys sharing her experiences as a consultant, providing admissions and marketing training to schools across the UK. She is also a co-trainer on the AMCIS diploma in schools admissions management. Before I pass over to Mary, the normal thing, which is if you have any questions for Mary throughout this presentation, please drop them into the Q&A and I will ask them on your behalf at the end. Mary, thank you so much for giving your time today. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Tori, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really looking forward to talking to you today, and I hope you've enjoyed the sessions you've tuned into so far this week. As Tori says, I've been involved with schools, admissions and marketing, and as a house parent, and in all sorts of guises over many, many years, and with AMCIS for many, many years too. And I've always found that their admissions and marketing events hugely valuable. So I was delighted to be invited to be part of this year's Admissions Connect event again. My session today, it's not got the sexiest of titles, but I hope that you will find it useful. I do always try to make the focus of my talks on practical tips, because that was always something that I wanted when I was working full time. And I always think that if you can take away even just one small nugget of something that you've not heard of or thought about before, then your half hour or so with us will have been well worth it. So without further ado, I'm going to crack on. So how and why should you audit your external communications? And we usually think of auditing in relation to our annual accounts, but auditing can actually be applied to anything you do. Actually, the word audit actually means a methodical check or examination. And I'm a great believer that we can audit all sorts of other areas of our school. The methodical checkup that you would do will enable you to see that everything is consistent, that everything is as it should be, and that you're being effective, and if anything needs changing. So why should you do it? Well, a few reasons really. The first one is that times change. We all know now that parents want faster, clearer communication, concise communication. The ways we communicate have changed, and no more so than in the last sort of 2 years. And we may well have been using the same templates for letters, for instance, offer letters and prospectus letters for years and years, because it makes our life easy. But it may be time to have a look at them again. Another reason is that people change, and this is maybe your admissions personnel. I know that some of you are one-man bands out there, but if you're lucky enough to have a team around you, you may have had new people join you and they need some training. I mean, if a new member of staff joins you, do you tell them what style they should be using in terms of their writing style or their templates? Also worth listening to new people, because they often come in with some really good new ideas. Another reason is that you may have moved into new international markets. They moved into any new markets actually, but the new international markets who may have very little knowledge of UK education or independent schools. So if you've been used to dealing with maybe Hong Kong and China, we know that the market is on the demise at the moment and you're seeking new places to recruit, have a look at how you've been communicating with your international market, because it may need some adjusting. Your school may have changed. You may have merged with another school, you might have been bought out by a consortium, you may have done a rebrand, or you may have changed from single sex to co-ed. And if any of those things are happening, then you really need to look at your comms in the light of the changes. Also, if you're doing an audit, it shows a commitment to improving your service to prospective families. We all know that customer services should be high on our priority, and you need to keep on improving this and looking at your comms from every now and then. Well, and it shows a commitment to it. And finally, it does help strengthen your school's brand identity. Because there is something that happens, and we call this something called brand drift. And this is something that happens slowly and subtly. Small little changes made here and there and not necessarily noticed. But after a while, lots of little changes will potentially confuse your brand. And after a while, particularly now that comms are mostly email based, we can easily drop our standards and slip into maybe a very informal mode rather than the corporate mode. I know when we email our friends and family and everything, we say, hi, Tori. But is that appropriate if you're dealing with prospective parents? Do you know what your team are writing when they're emailing day in, day out? The other thing is that we sometimes do things really quickly. In fact, we often do things really quickly because we haven't got time to think about consistency and branding. So we rush things off. And it's also rare that we do all our comms in one go. Things tend to be piecemeal, another letter here, another poster there, another advert here, that sort of thing. So things can drift slowly. The drift also can happen when parents are maybe moved from one department to another within your school. They may well start their journey communicating with the marketing department. And then after they get a bit further down the funnel, they might be moved on to the admissions department. Are you sure that your comms between the marketing department and the admissions department, for instance, are all in the same style? The audit doesn't need to be an annual check as you would do with your accounts, but I would suggest maybe every 2 or 3 years is a good rule of thumb, unless, of course, you have gone through one of those major changes. So, what comms should you be looking at? Well, basically, it's everything that is emanating from the admissions office in terms of communications with prospective parents, with pupils, with feeder schools, with agents, etc. I've put up a list here of some of the documents that will come under yours and the marketing department's remit. I'm sure there'll be loads of others that I've not thought of. And also, I suspect that most of you now will have moved away from print. If you haven't, then I'm sure that you will be thinking about it going that way soon. But I'm for sure that you will be sending out still information via PDFs or online links, online forms. Your marketing department, I suspect, will probably have responsibility for many of these things on the list. And it is important that all comms are audited from time to time, ideally with the admissions and marketing departments working together, and also other departments in the schools too, because comms will be going out from your bursary and from your academic departments, from the head's office. However, to do a full comms audit can be a long and complex and sometimes expensive job. I know full well that all of you out there working in admissions don't have much time. So I suggest you just start by focusing on your department and the documents that your admissions team are primarily responsible for. And there are 2 things we need to think about when you're doing your audit: consistency and effectiveness. So the first thing we're going to look at is consistency. The easiest way to do this with your audit is to get all your comms and lay them out side by side. Now, this will mean some printing out if you don't normally do print. And the reason for printing them out is that it's very difficult to spot inconsistencies if you look at documents individually. We think we will be able to remember all the details, but actually it's very hard to do so. So when you've got them all laid out on the floor on a big table, the first thing to do they all look like they've come from the same organisation? Your house style should be in your school's brand guidelines or style guide. If you don't have one of these, then I would strongly urge you to create one, but I suspect most schools do have one these days. I'm just going to show you two letters here, which at a glance appear to be the same. Don't read the words, it's an actual dreadful letter, which I'm going to use for another exercise at another time. But it's giving an example of how things can look the same, but if you take a really close look, there are a number of inconsistencies in style and in wording. And this is a sort of forensic look you need to take at your documents. I'm going to put these two up again, and just highlighted on the right-hand side, highlights are all the inconsistencies and differences in these two letters, even though the initial look was the same. So the things to look for consistency. Here's a checklist. I absolutely love a checklist. And I spoke to someone at the weekend at the independent school show, and she said, please, Mary, do give us a checklist. So here we go. The first one is your logo or your crest. If you've got, some schools have both. And if you have got both, be careful you don't mix and match, but ensure whichever you're using is placed consistently in each type of document. The font and type size, your brand colors, they should all be in your branding guidelines that I mentioned earlier, both for print and for your online comms. As to the layouts of your documents as well, and things like the date style. Often individuals have their own ideas about how to write the date, whether you do sort of 1/2/21 or do you write it out in full. And this is something that you should have as this, what's your corporate take on this? As well, where is it sat on a letter, for instance? Does this date go first, or does it go, the address go first? Should the date be on the right? Should it be on the left aligned? That sort of thing. Your schools should have also set you up with your automatic email headers and footers that are with your school branding on. You don't always see that. When you send out an email, you're not necessarily seeing what branding is going with it. Check that is as it should be. Very often, if they're set out by the IT department, for instance, the IT department might not have seen the brand guidelines and may not be doing it in the corporate style. And then I put the name of your school. Now, you think this is blooming obvious, wouldn't you? I mean, the name of your school. However, a lot of schools that have long names, and also we often refer to our schools by its initials. And so just think about how you reference it in your communications, particularly, again, if you're starting with a new market or you've got brand new people that you're communicating with, because it can be confusing. Just to give you an example of what I mean is, I understand, for instance, personally, the initials RHS to stand for the Royal Horticultural Society. But if you work at the Royal Hospital School Ipswich, for instance, they will refer to themselves as RHS. So really, when you're talking to somebody new or writing to somebody new, you should always put your school's name in full to start with, and then you can use the initials once it's clear what they mean. The same goes for acronyms. We're really great in the independent sector at using acronyms. But anybody taking their first journey into our world, as again, an international parents, have they any idea what initials such as IAPS or HMC stand for? So again, you should spell these, if you're going to use them, spell them out in full the first time you reference them, and from thereafter you can use them, the acronyms or the short forms. As a rule, I would say don't use too many, because unless they're really relevant. And moving on from there as well, the vocabularies. Again, we love strange vocabularies in our schools. We use things, and particularly for year groups. We have things like remove or shall, a first form, upper fifth, lower fourth. And make sure you make it clear to prospective parents what these year groups mean, and always refer to them in the same way. Don't mix and match them again with the state school years. Once they understand what it is, stick with it. I was very guilty of this, or people in my school I last worked at, very often some people would refer to year 7, which we didn't have a year 7, it was first form, and it got very confusing for parents. They would often ring up, what do you mean? What do you mean? So make it very clear and keep it consistent. And again, if you have any sort of weird and wonderful words for homework or whatever, use terms that laymen can understand. Another one, again, which is people say is a bit slightly odd, is your URL. Again, be consistent. Now, do you write it out in full with www. and then your school name? It's more often now people are dropping the www. And making it a much more a shorter form. But again, whichever you use, keep it consistent. How do you address people? Is it by first names or is it by Mr. and Mrs.? Your sign off. Again, this should be part of a corporate style. Do you use your first name or do you use more formal? Is it, do I sign off as Mary Hicks or do I sign off as Mrs. M. Hicks? Do you have your academic qualifications after your name? Do you put MA, BA? Do you put your job title? Do you put 101 initials after your name? Again, you should have a corporate style for this. I know people love to put all their initials, but actually, again, if they're not relevant or if they're confusing, then don't use them. Your email signatures, most likely, again, your school will have set up with your branded emails. If not, you need to get it done and get in this agreed format of how you're signing off. Again, people love to add their own twist with fancy signatures, with sort of pink writing or curly writing. It looks nice, or adding a picture. And that's fine if you're a personal one, but it really should be discouraged if it's not part of your brand guidelines. And explain it gently to them. If they decide to add a photo because they think it looks nice, you need to explain to them gently that that's not the way it should be. All these details may sound really petty, and like, Mary, really? It's a bit boring and all a bit ridiculous, but there is a science behind it. By keeping everything consistent, your parents, your customers will eventually learn to recognize your brand subliminally. We know now, going back to that fact that people don't have any time, they only spend a few seconds looking at things, they need to recognize your school instantly. We don't get much post now, really, these days, but I know for sure that if I get a letter through my letterbox and it comes maybe from my bank, I don't even have to open that envelope. I know it's from the bank. And you want to be in that situation with your school, that parents know that it's you. And then final one on consistency, and then personally I think it's the one I think is the most important, is the voice of your school. You'd have a single voice with a consistent message. Do you know what style you should be using in terms of the way you're writing? If you haven't done this as a school, then it's an important exercise to do. Are you going to write in a very formal way? Are you writing in a more friendly way? Do you use the word student? Do you use the word pupil? Do you write in the first person or the third person? What image are you trying to portray? Your voice should reflect your school's ethos. And if you have any buzzwords that you use in your taglines or whatever, your voice should reflect these too. For instance, if you say that you're a friendly school, your comms should reflect this. If you say that you're very academic, you must ensure that your language and grammar reflect it. I see over and over again schools saying they're caring, friendly, warm, flexible, but then you get something from them and it's not like that at all. And again, this is something that should come across consistently through all your communications and through all your departments. And the other thing is, who are your communications directed at when you're talking about your voice? Is it the pupils? Are they parents? Are they international parents or local parents? Are they your feeder schools? Are they agents? Do you need a different tone or style for each of these differing markets? You might not, but it's something, again, that you ought to think about. Going back to the fact that the email world that we live in, individual members of staff can easily, again, fall into a different style. And so knowing and understanding how they should be writing is really important. And I suggest you do occasionally look at each other's emails just to see how that goes. collect samples, analyze them in the light of who you're communicating with. And just as a slight aside, again, you should consider things like your voicemail message and your email out of office message. How do they sound? They're all part of your external comms too. I know when we go on holiday or we're going away for the weekend or whatever, we're really so pleased to go. You know, we might do our out of office message, and I've seen them many times. I'm out of the office next week. I won't be responding until I get back. You know, and if that's not very friendly. So if you say you're a friendly school, make it softer and more and in the right tone. So I said at the start, the whole process shouldn't take too long. It shouldn't be too stressful or time consuming because you're all way too busy to spend hours on it. But it is really, really important that everything is consistent for your brand recognition. So that's all I'm going to say on consistency. So you can wake up now. It's not the most, not the most sexiest of things, but it's really important. And move on to effectiveness. So you've now got all your comms as clear, succinct, looking beautiful, everything's in the right style, in the right fonts, everything absolutely looking perfect. However, you know, are your comms as clear and succinct as they should be? If communicating is a really complex process, and you know, the potential pitfalls at every stage, is your message clear? Is the medium that you've sent your message in the most appropriate for your audience? Has the recipient actually received it? If so, has it been understood? Has it had the desired effect? For instance, if you've asked for a reply, have they? Is it clear how they should reply or give you feedback? And I put this little cartoon up here because I think the old metaphor of the Chinese whisper really holds true. You thought you said one thing, but when you check, you find that a totally different message has been received. So another little checklist here. As I say earlier, are your comms as clear and succinct as they should be? People don't read things. We all know that. I've heard it over and over again from admissions staff, how frustrating it is that parents don't read the information you send them. As schools and academic staff love words, and they will write in flowing prose, but this flowing prose doesn't always work for you in the admissions department. I was at a school not long ago, and as an example, and the admissions team were tearing their hair out. They said to me, Mary, it's driving us mad. Our offer letters, we don't get any response. We ask for them to respond and we don't, and then we have to call them again or email them. So I said, well, what's the matter? They said, our letter's the matter. And the head had written the letter, and it was very long and very complex. And the bit about replying was right down at the bottom. And so parents just didn't read it. So I suggest you go through that, make sure that you write the letters in a way that's going to work for you and for the parents that you're communicating with. Make sure you put the most important stuff right at the top of your letter or your email. You know, with your email comms, busy people, you know this more than anybody, that receive hundreds of emails a day, and you need to be sure that yours grabs their attention so that they read it. So you have your subject line, and I said the subject lines very often can be just too generic, and people will either go delete, put aside, won't read that yet, we'll look at that later. You need to grab their attention so that they read it. Don't make it too generic. For instance, what I mean is you might have send out an email, and it might be about entrance exams, and your subject title will be entrance exams. People will receive it, yeah, okay, entrance exams, I know they're coming up sometime soon. Put that to one side, and it'll drop further and further down their inbox, and they won't do anything about it. If you put the subject line, closing date for entrance exams is this Friday, that gives them a call to action. That might grab their attention, and they will do something about it. You know, which one of those would you be more likely to open? There's been some research about this as well, and it shows, you know, subject lines for emails, apparently, if you have a subject line between 6 and 10 words, they have the highest opening rate. And then from 1 to 5 words is the second most opening rate. So as I say, think very carefully to make sure that your title is effective and it's going to do the job that you want. Just and a little aside here, there's a trend now, and I completely understand it, is to add photos to your emails to enhance them and to showcase your school. And this is fab if you've got the time to do it and you've got the right photos of the correct size and quality. Too many photos or of the wrong size can make the file sizes large, and then your emails are slow to load, and that would be a complete turn off for your parents. So, and unless you've got the right software and you can do it really quickly and professionally, then for them, don't try and bodge this one and just leave it out until you've got programs that will actually do it for you. The other thing about effectiveness is to actually make sure that what you're sending out is understood. It sounds obvious, but we are really close to the action, and we write stuff and we think it's very clear. And two things can happen. One is we make mistakes and we have omissions, and there's nothing worse than sending out a letter than having to send another as an amendment. It's wasting everyone's time, yours and the recipients, and it makes you look pretty inefficient. Simple things like, very often if we're using a template and it's got a date on it, it may be, maybe let's go back to entrance exams. It might be this year they were on the Friday, the 1st of September, and we send out next year's letter and we put the 1st of September, and it's not a Friday, it's a different day or a different date. It's really simple to do that, is to get the basic information wrong or miss out the time or something as well. So if you are the person who wrote the letter or the document, you can't really be the person who proofreads it, because our minds are trained to read what we want to see. So if there is something missing or there is a mistake, someone else will pick it up much more quickly than you will. Doesn't need to be a professional proofreader. Preferably use someone, particularly if it's a really important document, someone who's not involved in your admissions department, because again, we're all too close to the action and we'll know what's supposed to be there. You can ask a friend or a partner. You can always do the favor in return for them. And I used to do occasionally, just an example, I used to read, my husband was a teacher, a classics teacher, and occasionally he used to ask me to read an A-level classics essay, because he'd say, I think this is brilliant, but I'm too close to this. Can you read it and see, do you understand it? Have you learned something from it? And if I had, he said, actually, this is as good as I thought it was. So check again and make sure that you've got everything right before you send it out. Ideally, if you've got time, it's really a good idea to survey your prospective parents to get their thoughts on the communications they've had with you and your school. Again, this can be time consuming and potentially expensive, but you can do a simple questionnaire, would be enough. One of those, we get them again now, we get bombarded with these things, could give a star rating or a number rating. And these can be a really effective way for you to know whether things are working for you. You can ask them maybe how satisfied they were with the comms they received from your school, were the communications clear and consistent, how useful were they, did they receive enough, too much, were they at the right time, etc. And even a few answers will help you understand whether you've been effective or not. But again, particularly, it's worth doing this after you've sent out a very important set of documents, maybe the entrance exams, maybe the joining information, that type of thing. Ask your parents too about how they want to be communicated with, because this is changing all the time. Again, you know, letters now, really, if you're still using them, I'm not sure that they are. Target parents are reading much in the way of letters. I know, again, a personal story, my kids are grown up and they've got young families, they're really busy, mail comes in, they don't open it, put on a pile, we'll look at that, you know, when we've got 5 minutes in, and that could be in a few days time or a week or two's time. Again, say with emails, unless you've got the right titles and they will receive hundreds of them. Just ask. It may be that there's a different way. It may be text, it may be in a WhatsApp group, it may be video call, Zoom, whatever. Find out that, make sure that you're using the right communication channel. And then the final one on this, I would say, is, if you can, is make yourself a plan. An annual plan that goes across the whole year of all the comms that you will need to be sending out on a regular basis. If you've got a plan, it just makes your life much simpler, and it takes away some stress. So have a plan in the annual diary of what's going out, when it's going out, and who's responsible for sending it. That's going to ensure that your comms are sent out at the most appropriate times in the emission cycle and avoid any duplication and mistiming, and hopefully ease everybody's workload a bit, because you're not panicking and having to do things in a rush. So nearly at the end, folks, and finally, I want to say, please don't be like the guy on the left, or the left of my screen anyway. This is all about comms. So don't do this all on your own. Don't put yourself in a silo. If you're doing this, and you're auditing your comms, and you're going to have make changes, make sure you communicate the changes with your whole team. Share your templates with each other, and that will ensure there's consistency, and it will save you time. So if you've got time to do it, it's a really worthwhile exercise. So that's all from me, and I don't know if there's any questions out there, Tori, but I've enjoyed my session today, and happy to answer anything if there's any Q&A out there.
Thank you very much indeed. Really comprehensive and some great tips and ideas there. Thank you, Mary. Mary, can I just ask, when you're talking about communicating the changes, how would you go about that when you say talk to your colleagues? Would you go about that in a whole school way, or individually, or small groups, or how would you do that?
I think if it was your emissions team, just do it in the small groups, and I'd definitely talk about it rather than just emailing people or whatever. Definitely keep everybody in the loop the whole time. The best thing is to do, if you can, is to do all the changes, as a group, and so that again, when you're writing new stuff, that it's in the right style, and then you all know if you're making new templates, for instance, email templates, where they are, who they're for, that sort of thing. But definitely as a group, and in person, preferably.
And I think you and I have had them over the years, and I'm sure everybody who's listening has got one. There's always going to be one, perhaps member of staff, who just won't adhere to the rules. Have you got any thoughts or tips that you can help people to move them around?
It is really tricky, I know, and they will have their own ideas as well, about how things. I had a bit of a run-in with a member of staff not that long ago, actually, who decided that putting his photograph on the end of an email was the right way to go. And it did look nice. There was no, it was right, but that wasn't what our policy was. And we had quite a ding-dong chat about it. But it just takes some time and patience in trying to explain to them, the reasons why. And you just have to keep going back to them and nudging them the whole time. It's not always easy, but monitoring it is the hardest, actually, I think, because especially when staff are sending emails out, you don't see them. So you don't see when they've maybe, say, put their signature in lovely pink swirly writing or whatever it is. That's the hardest thing, is monitoring. It's really difficult. So every so often, having a check on how your staff and what they're doing and what they're sending out, without feeling like you're breathing down the neck, I think is pretty important.
Right, thank you. I've got another question here, is where would you suggest the best places to find a good template letter, etc.? Sorry,
Tori, I couldn't quite catch you. Where?
To find the best template, find the best place to find a good template letter.
That's a good question. I'm not sure that there is anywhere, actually. I think you just have to come up with your own.
Right.
I think you've just got to come up with your own, really, depending on what they are. Ask other colleagues in other schools, again, we should share these things. They're pretty basic stuff, some of it, isn't it? Like offer letters. Ask your friends and colleagues in other schools, what do they send out, and maybe adapt it. I'm a great believer that we should all share our information and help each other. So
yeah, and on that note, one of the best places to do that for anybody who's wanting that information is I would start by trying it on our Facebook page and just putting it out there on the Facebook page. If anybody who's been prepared to share any template letters. Yeah,
people are really generally very good at it and helping each other out,
Yes.
And it's nothing new really out there. We're all just rehashing. But if you do borrow a template, again, just make sure you to turn it into your style. Again, how to make sure that the voice of your school comes through clearly.
Yes, that's what I was just about to say. Just make sure it reads as if it's coming from your school. Yes. Mary, thank you very much indeed for your time and for that excellent presentation this afternoon. Really helpful once again. Thank you to everybody who's been listening in right now. And Decisions Connect, one more webinar this afternoon, and then tomorrow we have 2 more as well. So thank you again, Mary, and thank you to everybody. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.